intro. Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit in November 2021, where we're going to be talking about another great set of my favorite topics of risks, graph, dashboards, all using a nice graph database called Jira. And we got Abbas, Chris, and Petra who's going to walk you through it. So guys, over to you.
Cool. Hi guys, welcome to the session. So like Dennis said, we're going to be talking about visualizing risks with graphs and dashboards using our favorite tool, Jira. So I'm Chris Holman. I've been at Glasswall for coming up to a year, and I'm joined today by Abbas and Petra. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hi, I am Abbas. I am the head of InfoSec at Glasswall. Been working here for the last 4.5 years. Yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Petra. I'm a cybersecurity engineer here at Glasswall, and I've been at Glasswall for almost 2 years as well. So it's been an exciting journey.
Cool. So over to you, Abbas, about the challenge we faced when it come to risk management and how to bring our risks alive and how we sort of presented that data to other teams and execs.
Yeah, basically, this slide is just about the challenges we faced as an information security team. I think this is the challenge every single security team have. And when it comes at how do you rank and how do you rate your risks, it is very important to understand the altitude the risk is on, and definitely the audience that you are presenting to. Basically, when you are presenting as an example to risks to a non-technical audience, or risk to a C-level board, executive board. So basically, you need to make sure that you know the audience. You go and you're not gonna go and bore them about a very, very specific technical issue you are having somewhere where a comma was missing from a code or something like this, which cause big issues. Basically, you need to make sure that in this case that you have the message is very clear, straight there. They just they are interested in that bit there, so that you are presenting them. Basically, you need to simply prioritize and make things quantifiable. So prioritizing, it means that to focus on the top cyber risk and provide the information to the board, the information the board really need to know. Basically, when you start about as well presenting the risk, and if you want to get the attention of the rest of the company, as an example, you need to make sure to keep in mind that to get the attention, the security attention at all levels at an organization, you need to make sure that the message, as an example, originates from the top. And that's what you need to start. You need to start from. So it is very important to pass your message to the top in the best way. You need to make sure as well, you present the metrics, in a consumable way. And that's how what we're gonna show you here, the power of graphs and dashboard, the power of using Jira as a graphical database, with other things which we're gonna get to in a minute. And basically, how do you make as well, every conversation you have with someone, as an InfoSec, professional. So how do you translate that into a risk? Basically, you talk to a developer, and let's say, or you are talk to a head of department, or you talk to anyone. Just make sure everything you have there, you translate it into a risk. Make the people log that risk. Make the people accountable. And as you know, and as always Dennis say, when you make people accountable, they will get into fixing the risks. So that's it from on this slide.
I just want to add to that as well. I mean, it's quite a recent thing we've done. So our risk management has evolved over the past sort of 6 months. You might remember the talks we had about risk cats and rats, and we've kind of taken that and evolved it into how we're sort of seeing it today. But it's still very early stages, so there's still a long way to go. But what we're going to show you is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mentioned as well on the top one, which was where we say why. I think Petra will get to this soon when she presents the risk categories later on in in one of the next slides.
Cool. Slide number 3.
Right. So, some considerations that we had while we were deciding how to, restructure a risk framework and how to translate it into a graph that we would, input the data into Jira and then have as a graph is, one thing is, on deciding the level of risk, we used to use the risk matrix quite, religiously. And then we were thinking about also one of the things was risk taxonomy. How are we going to, are we abusing the taxonomy at that point when we were, trying to design our graphs? And then we're thinking also about telling the story. So in regards to the risk matrix, actually, it turned out that for the audience that we were supposed to talk to, it wasn't working. And it wasn't working purely because we wanted, for example, if we wanted to present the top 10 engineering risks from a risk matrix point of view, we would get certain risk levels, which you'll see later on the dashboards, for example, high. But if you're going to present top 10 engineering risks, you can't have them all high, all the same color. You can even lose credibility while doing that, even though by just, religiously going into the risk matrix, they might all turn out to be high, actually high. But if you present it to an audience like that, you might lose credibility. You might lose an opportunity to establish a good communication channel because they'll be like, what are these on about? Like, is everything a risk to them? Is everything a high risk to them? So we decided to kind of be more loose on the risk levels. We decided we're not gonna make it as a viewpoint from like an objective risk qualification point of view, but we decided to just see it from like our point of view, and in a way to say, like, for example, if we're presenting the top 10 engineering risks, we're going to present the highest one in red, and we're going to present I'm going to present the lowest one in green, even though realistically maybe that green one isn't really green and low, In regards to the risk taxonomy, I'll talk about it a bit later, but presenting a risk in a purely kind of academic point of view, vulnerability plus threat equals risk might not speak to the audience again, because if we're talking to some execs who don't have the technical background, we again might lose their attention, we might lose their focus, we might lose credibility. And that's where we come to the third point, is telling a story, right? So we want to tell a story, we want to put the dots together for them, and we want to show why something matters. Right, next slide. So this is a little small representation of how, for example, we can tell a story with a graph. So I'm going to explain the risk cats a bit later, but basically the concept is we have risk aggregators, which we named, registers and categories, and then they pour into, more granular risk categories, or even at the point of risk cats, they become actual risks. We had to remove some of them, so because of confidentiality, and this has all been anonymized anyway. But the point here is the graph will actually show really well how a couple of risks that are smaller and more granular can actually create a much bigger risk, and can show why another risk actually matters even more. So next slide, please. And this is the initial.
Just on that one, it's probably worth mentioning that every one of those yellow boxes is a Jira ticket, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Dennis, for reminding that. Yeah. So every one of these boxes is a Jira issue ticket, and the links that you see between them are actually these are the Jira links. So that's how we decided to go for it, and we link these issues in a way that we knew that a graph is gonna be readable and digestible. So this is a risk matrix that we were initially deploying and using, but as I said, we decided to deviate a bit from it. When we're looking into the Glasgow risk register, the main one, the corporate one, we're still quite using it quite religiously. But when we went down to our technical, more technical risks, more kind of engineering kind of risks, we decided to start just using, more like a risk ranking based on what's important for Glasgow rather than, like a general risk matrix point of view.
Cool.
And next
slide.
Right, so how we approached it. Over to you, Chris.
Awesome. So yeah, like Petra said, we've kind of deviated away from the classical sort of risk frameworks and the risk taxonomies, and we've decided to move to Jira, use Jira as our sort of graphical database in essence, and then built on top of that, we're using Jupyter notebooks to generate sort of graphs and charts and kind of bring the stuff in Jira to life. We just found that's a lot easier to make sure that we're sort of painting the bigger picture as opposed to just showing somebody like an Excel sheet. It's easier to bring something to life when you can see it in a graph or in a chart. So that's kind of the reason why we've gone the way we have, and it's easy to scale as well. I mean, although it's a bit of a pain to put the data into Jira, once you've got that data, to build on that data is quite easy to do. So it's a good way to scale.
And I think this, Chris, will be, if you go back to the slide, 2 slides before where we have the graph, that will, if you show how the link between, and I think Petra is going to go and explain, this relationship later on. But if you see, let's say, when we say risk cat 1 on the far left, so that's like a top level risk and how it comes, and you can see what is a lower level risk for that specific category, which as an example is a risk cat 2 42 container Docker file. And you can see the power of Jira and Graph here. It's just like it shows you how things are linked. So basically, you are not blind when you are trying to check, on which altitude should this risk be, and who are the owner of this risk, because we can show in other graphs who are the owners, who are the stakeholders, business owners, or whatever. But it will give you a good visualization on what is the category of the risk here, what it should be here, and the linkage as well. So as you see, if I go to the far right and I say I'm talking about the risk cat 4, this is where it gets really, really technical. This is where it gets there is that vulnerability in that component here that we need to fix now, and that's associated to something called what we call a rat, which I will go through later on. But I just want to show the power of Jira, showing you how the risks are connected, a top level risk from a risk cat 1, in talking about Kubernetes risk in general. And I think Petra will go through this as well later on. But this is why we needed a graphical database. We needed to see this. We've seen a lot of a risk platform that can do a lot of good stuff, but not good enough for us, not for what we do, and for the size of our company as well, and for the practice we do at our company, to be honest. So, thank you.
Just to add one note here, right? In a way, and I think Chris said it was a bit of a pain to put data, but look, the bottom line is that it's a pain to enter risk data anywhere, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you're going to use it. Even if you use a spreadsheet, right? It's always painful to capture the data in the first place, especially when you start from scratch. What I really like about the graph, approach, and we use Jira just because it happens to be a great graph database, although it doesn't think it's a graph database, but it actually works really well as a graph database. It actually simplifies the connections. So when Abbas was talking about making sure you can find the stakeholders, or that we can have this fact-based, almost hyperlinked sort of set of data, where when you talk about a specific risk, when the question is, but why this risk exists and what we're doing about it, then you go to the next level down, and then you keep going to the next level down. And it also means that when you start to visualize the data and calculate risks in an aggregation form, it means that you can now, based on the actions that you do, you can have a bubble up of the data, which is super powerful. So that's really why this thing scales quite nicely, because ironically, once you have the graph data, you actually accelerate more but when you compare that, when you have like these spreadsheets or these other systems, usually the more data you have, the slower you go, and the more you need to maintain the whole thing. Where here, as we improve the graph, the amount of data, the amount of effort you need to do to maintain some of this sometimes gets a bit lower, because you have this interactivity of making a change, see what the graph looks like, visualize it, and eventually arriving at the story, which is really what you want to be able to do. Or actually arriving at decisions, right? Which is fundamentally the objective.
And Dennis, I want to just add something here. When we say risk cat 3, let's say 252, if you highlight that somehow, I don't know, Chris. But I mean, if you see that one, everything we say is created by this risk. These are our whys. So why do we have this as a risk? Because it's created. Why is it a risk? Because it's created by, the lower level risk. All our your whys you ask when you do a risk. Why do we have this as a risk? And you start asking your whys. So your whys are all in here. You can see them.
And it's important to know that depending on which direction you're going, the answer will start to take some shape. So when we talk about a lot of our risks, one of our audiences is the business. So naturally, the whys start to arrive at languages that the business cares and understands, and it makes sense to them. And ultimately, you can almost think of this as a translation layer, right? Where what we're doing is we translate basically what is a very technical piece of information into basically a business language that makes sense to who needs to make decisions. And sometimes those individuals are in technology, but a lot of the time they're not. So it's very powerful to be able to have this language, almost transition layer, that allows you to say, well, you care about X, so X is a problem. And then when they say why you say that, you can then go almost as deep as that individual wants to consume the data.
And it also, I mean, using Jira, it helped us sort of define what the scheme is going to look like, because we could create something on Jira and then look at the graph to see what that actually looks like. So that helped sort of map our overall vision for it. So cool.
So we'll answer the question at the end of.
So yeah, the why. So small size company, potential to grow. So we needed a risk framework that was tailored to our case. So we're a small team. In fact, there's just 3 of us, the 3 on the call. So we need something kind of easy to manage and easy to maintain. And the classic risk taxonomy, that's always a tongue twister, might not speak to the audience. So we've kind of decided to make something unique to us that kind of works for us. And dashboards kind of back that up. So dashboards are telling the picture, telling the story, and Jira in that sense is our source of truth.
Yeah, I mean, we went through a lot of, we had a couple of demos, a couple of different suppliers, and I think none of them ticked all the boxes, everything we wanted to see, especially we are a small size company, we are growing, as we are saying here, but we wanted something which is, it is to our taste, to be honest. So, and we had the opportunity to, we have Dennis and his experience with Jira, and we had the opportunity to go and develop what we're going to show you.
And we already had a lot of data in Jira to start with. I mean, we had a lot of sort of our risks and stuff mapped out, but it wasn't really flowing how we wanted it to. So this is like version 2 of the version 1 we did like 6 months ago.
Basically, you are kind of answering Didar question, how long did it take us to do this? Basically the hardest bit is not only the risk stuff, it's fine, but I mean how to put everything on Jira. We started, we are using Jira every single person we have every single person on Jira. We have every single role on Jira. We have every single product and every single vulnerability. We took us some time to build it. I mean, the risk management stuff, is a part of the whole system. But it took us some time, but that's what was will build, by time, let's say, our onboarding, our playbooks, Jira, is for us is more than it's not only graphical database, but we had the opportunity to, link in our risks, a risk cat 1 or 2 or 3, 4, it is linked to a role in Jira, and the role is linked to a person in Jira. if you want to, it took us a long time, but I mean, it wasn't directly all the time we put to develop this was not only on the risk management. So it's something like continuous. We are doing this all the time. So as an example of the IT onboarding, they add a new role for a new starter on Jira. They map that role to that starter as an example. Then when we go and map a risk, we go and map that risk to the starter, to the person ourselves. So yeah, it took us some time, but I mean, it becomes like kind of a routine later on. So
I don't think it helped because we didn't really know. We didn't really know where it was going in that sense. We was kind of doing it as we went. And like I said, we was using the graphs as like the visual aid to see, okay, so that makes sense. And we was using the connection links to sort of build that picture. But I think going back to the question is, if you knew what framework you was following and what setup you needed, it wouldn't take too long to do. It's just we kind of done it as we went.
Yeah, we had a couple of iterations of it. That was the thing.
Well, so I've done a couple of these, right? and the thing that I would say is the most important element of this is you can start from scratch, right? Like, the problem here is not whether you already have a framework or not. The hardest challenge is actually to get a good schema or to basically get a structure, but also have the ability to customize your schema. So I don't think there is a schema that works out of the box for everybody. I think that if you look at what we end up creating, we end up creating a schema that works for us. And I don't think that's a coincidence, right? I feel that is the fact that we create, still even today, we create new issue types almost weekly. We create new link types for breakfast, right? Like, how many times we're in a meeting where 2 or 3 or 4 issue types or link types were created, right? That's almost the thing that's most important, is to allow the team to basically start replicating how they want to think about, in this case, risks and vulnerabilities and other things in this case, a graph database. That's the hard part. And I usually, to be fair, a good place I like to start is with incidents, because incidents is a place where you get lots of value straight away, because it helps a lot to capture a lot of the stuff that you do. It helps the team to get their heads around the power of capturing data, hyperlinking data, tracking things, and naturally lends itself to vulnerabilities and risks.
Cool. Next slide, over to you, Petra, I think.
Right.
Check out the awesome visuals on that as well.
Right, so this visual is because, at some point your risk logging can actually become like a game of chess. Some moves are riskier than others. Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn to save the queen. So hence the chess analogy. Next one. Right, so risk registers. Right, so when we were thinking about our graph nodes, we realized straight away that we're deviating from risk taxonomy, and we cannot call these nodes risks anymore. So we were thinking about like, what are they then? And we realized they're actually aggregators of risk. And that's what led us to risk registers. So, risk registers are a controversy these days in the risk world, because a lot of people, a lot of risk experts are actually against them. But our risk register that we constructed is not your typical one anyway. However, we just saw it as as aggregator of different types of risks. So the pros of, classical risk registers is risk logging, delegation of risk ownership, useful management tools. It's a useful management tool, and they can be useful for inciting debate, because if you use them to present risks, they can start a debate between stakeholders. A lot of them miss to represent the context of each risk. That's it's the biggest con, and there's a lot of other cons that can happen. Like, for example, if you have a risk register full of untreated risks, then if that gets out and that leaks, that can be quite embarrassing. So it's basically a risk register is another asset to protect, especially if it's not kept up to date and if it's full of untreated risks. So just to show how we approach this then, and you know, abused in a way the name risk register as well, and we made a couple of mini risk registers, and that's where our risk reg Jira issue was born. So basically we started with you know, risk reg 0, which was the Glasgow corporate risk register, and then we went a level lower and we had like operational risk, for example. And then if you go a level lower as well, we are entering risk reg 2. Some of you might argue that these are risk categories, not risk registers, but we still decided for our graph purposes and for our presentation purposes to still keep calling them risk registers, because we will get down to risk categories a bit later, lower down.
Yeah.
So,
and just here, like, it's very important to say that at this level, and actually Dida, you were asking about, you know, sort of a schema generic. This is kind of it. Like, this applies to every single company, right? Like, what you see here is stuff that every single company has to deal with. The question then becomes how high, medium, low these issues are, right? But what you see here is items that are business focused, right? These are things that, in a way, you know, the business cares about, and then we're going to be linking from here into some of the other things we do. And also this applies to other parts of the business too.
and you know, later on you'll see Chris will show you the dashboards, how we use traffic light system to actually present these risks, because a graph is one way, but we also use dashboards as well. All right, moving next. So then we went lower, a level down from the risk reg issues, so risk registers. We went into the risk categories. And if you move on to the next slide, Chris, what you can see is, you know, what we were thinking about is how are we going to make a graph you know, more granular, because this is where we needed to zoom in, right? Like, we had a risk register there, as you saw in the previous graph, and we needed to zoom in. And we thought if we go from, you know, jumping into a risk, from a risk register directly into something that we call risk, might be too much of a jump. So we decided to still put intermediary, like risk, still aggregators between them, and just call them risk categories. Because if we would start calling these risks, we would definitely, you know, go into serious taxonomy abuse. So this is where we kind of like decided to go with risk categories. And as you see, like, the risk categories pour down, like it starts from, for example, engineering risks, and they just pour down into like more granular categories, for example, you know, non-compliance, business continuity, security awareness, incident management. And then they go down into risk cat 3s. And then when we get down to the risk cat 4s, as Abbas was showing you before, we actually came down to the technical bit where, you know, we're actually showing the actual risk that's directly related to the vulnerability. So, you know, in a way, like, we went a couple of levels, a couple of layers, and we came right then to the technical layer where we're showing the actual vulnerability. This is all, by the way, just made for the purposes of this presentation. None of it is our actual risks. Cool. So as you also see before, sorry, one more thing that I wanted to mention is, as you saw before, we all still have that is created by in here. If anyone has any comments on our, you know, naming conventions, taxonomies, please feel free to comment. I'm curious what anyone has to say. All right, over to you, Abbas.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought I was muted, sorry. Okay, so we're talking about linking to vulnerabilities and threat actors. So basically, if you, Chris, just go to the next slide. So basically, when we're talking about threat actors, so we went and as well, we mapped all our threat actors on Jira. Basically, we have too many threat actors. Basically, they're all laying within the four main threat actors categories. Basically, cyber criminals, who are motivated by money, so they will attack if they can profit. The other ones that what they call them, the hacktivists, who want to undermine, probably competitors or something like that, who want to undermine our reputation or destabilize our operations. The other one, state sponsored, I think these ones are quite difficult to identify. They are really hard, and we have insider threats. I mean, they can be malicious, but I mean they can also be well-meaning people who have been led astray. But I mean, here on the last one, training and user behavior analytics is the way, are the way forward. As you can see, we were talking about altitude of risks and stuff like that. So risk cat 4 is the lowest risk we have on our Glassful risk management system. And at this level, the risk cat 4 is usually linked to, well, it depends on the risk, but I mean usually it is if the risk is originated because of vulnerability. So as you see, it is connected to a vulnerability in this case, which is 782, and it might be connected to multiple vulnerabilities. So you might have multiple vulnerabilities, causing the same risk. And at the bottom, as you can see, it says is created by. It creates the risk cat 3 240, and usually we keep here one link, but I kept this link here on purpose on the risk cat 3 240 at the bottom, which is a higher level risk, which was created because of the risk cat 4. But I just wanted to show you the bidirectional link in here, because you can go all the way from the bottom to the top, or from the top to the bottom. So, and every single risk, as you see, every single risk it has a rat. And a rat here in our, I know we have cats and rats here in our system, but I mean, cats are categories and rats are risk assessment and treatment. So every single risk has its own risk assessment and treatment. I mean, just one thing on the threat actors, these are the 4 categories, but we have a lot of personas which we created on our on Jira, which meets the within the 4 categories. We went and did a lot of research and stuff like that, and we created a couple of personas with some fake photos and stuff like that, and what they are capable of.
I think for the threat actors, it's quite vital because it kind of builds context, and it kind of gives the risk a bit of, or the risk or the vulnerability a bit of sort of meaning, because if we know the sort of people that are likely to exploit something, we can then, visualize how we can protect against that.
And we can assess the vulnerability, right? So, I mean, if it is how exposable is it?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that sometimes is missing, and it's the kind of thing that is also possible to do once you start to think about a graph and you start to expand on it. Is that my view is that if you don't take into account the threat actor and who can do it and where the attack is coming from, when you're looking at the risk and the vulnerability, you're missing context, right? Because you can have something that's filled quite problematic, but when you actually look at the reality of it being exploited and who can exploit it, you realize that, for example, some might be, well, the threat actor has to be a malicious employee. Well, we go, okay, do we have malicious employees at that level? Are we worried at that level for malicious employees, or do we have bigger problems if we do have malicious employees, right? So the same thing for state actors, right? Some things, yes, you need to be able to survive against. Others, you go, well, we don't see it, or it's not part of our current threat landscape to survive, at least at that level, an attack from it, right? So it's important to always put this into context, because sometimes a mid-sized vulnerability that can be exploited by a threat actor that exists in much bigger quantities is way more problematic than others. So it's super critical that you're able to rationalize your risks and vulnerabilities and your actions in a way with what is actually, and so who is actually going to basically do that. And then there's a second big question, is when something happens, how well can you detect it? Because that's also very important, because sometimes there's a certain type of exploits that, yes, they can happen, but the side effects are so visible that you very quickly get on it, and very quickly you limit the blast radius, where other types are much less visible. So all of that needs to be taken into account when you kind of map the threat actors, which is something that you can then do in a graph environment, because you can connect those threat actors to categories of risks or specific vulnerabilities or specific items, and then benefit from the hyperlinking of it.
Cool. So once we've assigned the threat actor, or the threat vector, should I say, we want to then assign the owner. So we want owners for the risks, so the owners can essentially become responsible for those, and we're making people accountable. So the way we've kind of done that is we've essentially mapped out our entire org chart into Jira. So we've got the top level role, which is obviously the CEO, and we've mapped out all the roles that are underneath him. And what that's allowed us to do is to basically map each risk to a particular owner. So we'd have a business owner, a technical owner, and a stakeholder in some cases. But what that does is it allows people to sort of be accountable for those risks. Without that, they kind of get lost in limbo, and no one's really doing anything about them because they're not aware that they're the owner. So again, each of these yellow tickets is an item on Jira. So we've got roles in Jira, and each of them create different business titles. And this is what Chris, it looks like. Go on.
Sorry, Chris, can I interrupt just on the previous one? I want to say here, like, we map it roles, and roles are, people can be assigned to roles. So basically, so if someone leaves, it's not a big problem, because everything is mapped to their role. So that's what I want to say.
Yeah, the people slot into the roles, right? So the role will always stay the same, but the people may change.
Yeah.
And what that looks like in practice, you can't see it very well, but that's intentional because it's got some sensitive data on there. But we've essentially mapped out the CPO, and we're wanting to show all the high-level risks that the CPO has. So if someone coming into the business and there's an open position, we could go onto Jira, we could map out that role, and we could show that new person all of the risks that are associated to that role. And we can do that via Jira. So that's kind of what it looks like in a graph format. But then the new thing that we've developed is the chart. So we can now start to see different roles and the risks that are associated to those roles. So the one at the top is CTO. So this is Mr. Cruz. And I've anonymized all of this, so you can't really see what products they are, but you get the idea. So, I mean, product one, we've rated it as high, and the reasons are we've got these different risks involved, and that's the same for every product. So now a product owner or a business owner can go and look at their risks, and they can clearly see what the highest risks are associated to their role. We've also done the same for the CPO, so Chief Product Officer. So now, people are made accountable for the risks that are associated to them.
And now it's important here to understand that this is actually a graph from Jira data. What you actually have at the top is the parent, ticket that then links. So basically, the column titles, product one, product two, product three, they are the parent Jira issues, basically nodes of then the Kubernetes risk manager, etc. So you can see that this is the same. Basically, you manage this data through Jira, through the graphs that you saw in the other way. But this is a much more easy to understand and easy to digest, basically, visualization that allows the business to now consume this data without even caring if this is in Jira or not.
Exactly, and we use Jupyter, right? I mean, we should have maybe gave a little demo on how that works, but essentially you just put in the title, say is created by or has owner or whatever, and that will then spit out this chart you're seeing here. So it's a
Yeah,
really
Yeah, so
easy
actually,
way.
technically speaking, the way it works is all that data from Jira is pumped into Elastic using a Lambda function. So every time you make a change in Jira, ends up on an Elastic index, which makes querying much easier. Which, by the way, querying Jira is a pain, right? So don't query Jira, right? Because Jira is super slow. Pump the data from Jira into Elastic, and then you query there. And what's happening here is you actually have a Lambda function that then you can say, give me this particular graph, or start here and view this. That Lambda function actually opens up a local web browser, who then opens up that view, which is, this is actually an HTML table that you then take a screenshot and you send that screenshot, you return that screenshot as a base64 string. And what Chris was mentioning is that you can consume that, for example, from a Jupyter notebook, and Jupyter notebook simply calls the Lambda function and then renders the image in a notebook, which is how they took the screenshot here. I think we need a diagram for this, man, to explain the flow. But that's technically how this is possible. You could also do it with the Slack bots.
Also, I wanted to add, like, for example, this CTO and CPO dashboards are actually, cherry-picked dashboards, which, with an issue called top-level risks, because we wanted to show each role what their top-level risks are, and that's why they're all kind of red and orange. And it doesn't mean that, for example, vulnerability management, that the CTO needs to start suddenly sweating because the vulnerability management is atrocious. It just means that out of all the risks in the engineering world, these are kind of the ones that he should pay the most attention to. But it doesn't mean that the level itself of the vulnerability management is terrible. It just means comparing to some other risks, it's higher. So this is where we deviated from the risk matrix.
Yeah, this is very important, because when you look at the strategy, right, the strategy of a security team should be connected to the items that they're acting or working on, and the items that they're working on should be connected to the highest things that you have. So if you start, you're going to have insanely high risks, and you should be addressing that. But as you eliminate those high risks, what you're doing is you're gaining almost granularity. So what before was a medium risk basically now becomes a high risk, because you got rid of all your basically critical or stuff that was really on fire. So basically what Petra was describing is very important, that this has been normalized by the highest of what you've got there. In a way, you almost can measure the maturity or the place where a security team is by how bad is the one here, right? Like if you look at the highest here, if you look at how bad that is, you can almost tell the level of fighting or like so firefighting that you're doing, or the level of, are you dealing with now still very technical emergency things that are super bad, or are you now thinking a lot more technical, a lot more, like for example, some of the Kubernetes risks that we're dealing now with, we're now dealing it at a systemic level. See the presentation that Petra and the team did yesterday, right? And I was writing, basically, we now are dealing with the risks in a much more holistic, across the board, strategic way, but comparatively, it's still one of the areas that we're putting a lot of effort because we want to get better. But it's very important that this is normalized by what is worse at today, not the level, because you want to have some shades, right? You don't want everything to be red. So, you don't want everything to be orange, right? You want to make sure that you look at, for example, these reds, and you should be able to completely align it with the current security strategy, with the current security project, where what the team is working on should now be reflected in here.
Yeah, it also depends on the risk appetite. For example, like, we decided that we want to, with our Kubernetes risks, that we want to get it 100% right. So we're still going to keep it red there. Well, if you think about it, how much we've done for our Kubernetes security, it's like there's a lot of security in depth there, and we are very happy with the current situation. But just because we want to be perfect in this scenario, for us, this is going to be red, while for some other teams, this actually might be green, and they might need to worry about, cloud security more, or, other things.
And I just want to add as well that, if what we have on the screen is, let's say, accepted by the CTO, that means like, any security work which is not focused on the high risks we are seeing here, that means that we are not doing the right thing. So basically, So this will help as well, like a security focus as well for the team.
Exactly, yeah. And that moves on quite nicely to the traffic light dashboards. So it kind of explains this, but on a different light. Let me let the graphic roll for a couple of seconds because that's quite cool. Okay, so this is per product. So if we want to look at a product that Glasswall offers, we would see something like this. And it works in exactly the same way as what we've just seen in the previous slide. So we're using Jupyter to basically manipulate the data in Jira, and we're displaying all of the highest risks, or sorry, all of the risks that are associated to, in this case, product X. And what it's showing us, I mean, product X has 8 different categories, and it color codes them depending on the severity of that category. So we could easily give this to an exec or a board member, and we could say, look, here's the product. Look at the red stuff. That's the stuff we need to be concerned about. And it's quite easily digestible as opposed to old-fashioned ways of doing it, if you like. But obviously the plan is for this to, over time, is to start going, more green as time goes on. But yeah, so product-based risk. And another example of that is product Z. So again, the same sort of concept. I've normalized all the data on this one because I didn't want to show anything, but you get the idea. So you can start seeing like the traffic lights in terms of the risk score for that product.
And this traffic light data, this is literally high, medium, lows, right? So this is literally the data that we capture in Jira as one of the attributes of the tickets. So again, like if we, and eventually, the idea is that for some of those values to actually be calculated dynamically based on other set of inputs. But the point is that the way we normalize this and the way we manage it is through an attribute in the Jira ticket that is responsible for that particular ticket.
Exactly, yeah. So as soon as one item becomes high, it will go red, and then we know we need to pay attention to it. And the other view of this is we can do it by division, if you like. So multiple teams that make up a division, essentially. And then we can display the risks that were associated to that division. So if you want to sit down with your team, sort of describe what the highest risks are, we can do it by division as well. So we can now sort of report on the highest risks per team member, but by manager, by product, by division. So we're really starting to sort of bring to life all the data we've got into Jira in an easy to digest sort of format.
And it's important to say that these titles here have to be basically 100% relevant to the company, right? This is the things that when you think and you present, this is the stuff that we care about, it has to make sense to everybody. And it's always critical that you refactor this to take into account the language that the target audience understands. So it's easier to make sure that it has language that they understand, and then you're trying to shove things in here that that makes no sense. Because remember that you can hyperlink from here, right? So you hyperlink the next level down and next level down, and every level you go down becomes more granular, more technical, more almost domain specific.
Exactly, yeah. And then going back to the slide Petra mentioned about the risk register. So it now allows us to report on the risk register from like the top level. So we can see, the 4 different categories, and each of the items underneath that are color coded depending on, the sort of severity of that particular category. So this is a really cool way of having, a quick glance at, if you like, at the risk register overall for a company, and it would tell you sort of the areas to focus on. And this again can be used in board meetings, if you like, to get an idea of how current risk status. And that was it, to be honest. So the next goal for us is to use Elasticsearch. So we want to go up a level. We want to start using Elasticsearch to sort of manipulate the data and create a lot of these graphs for us in like a better format and on demand. And the overall objective is to have everyone at Glasswall go into like a dashboard location, and they can make their own risk charts, risk graphs, and find out who's responsible for what, and just make it a bit more kind of interactive. Q&A.
Well, actually, there's another thing that we added. If you go back to the previous slide, show me one of the diagrams. Yeah. So one, or maybe the one before. So one of the things that we now adding is also a risk 3 to 6 months ago. So where the team was, and also what was the projected moving forward. So what this gives you, it also gives you a sense of movement of what you're doing. So imagine, in each of these Jira ticket items, you're now going to have 3 risk ratings. You have one risk rating, which is where we were 6 months ago. You have another risk rating is where we are today, and another risk rating, which is where we expect to be in 3 months or 6 months from now. And what this is very important is the first delta, where we were and where we are, shows the evolution of the team. And the second one, where we are, where we want to be, shows where the team is actively working on and where we are actually, engaged in activities. And this is actually very important because one of the things that we sometimes don't talk about is that let's say that you have a security team that has zero individuals, right? Let's say that the team was here today and then everybody disappeared overnight, right? What happens is that you don't become massively insecure from day one, right? What happens, some things might go red very quickly, but it means that over time suddenly a lot of the mediums or even the lows that were kept that way because there was a team in there, suddenly they start to become red, right? Because suddenly those activities are not happening. So this allows you to start to understand what is the impact of the existing team, what are they doing, are they moving the needle? So for example, let's say you have a security team that today is already completely maxed out, right? That means that team is maxed out just with BAU stuff. They're not going to be able to change any of this. This what is almost like you go to the business and say, look, this risk dashboard is exactly the risk dashboard that will exist in 3 months from now because the existing team is not able to evolve. If the team is already overstretched, then actually it might get worse. If the team actually has the ability to do new things or to evolve, then some of these will become orange. And that's ultimately what you're saying. You're saying, look, our job for the next 3 months is to transform 3 of these boxes into orange or green, right? And then if the business turn around and say, well, that's not good enough, then you have a very good metric to have a conversation about budgets and activities and focus, right? Because then you can go from a business point of view, you say, look, are we in alignment where, for example, the security team is spending their resources? Are we okay that we focus on making sure that box goes from red to light orange, right? Or to red to orange. And that's something that from a business point of view works really well because you can have that conversation. Cool. All right, Chris. Back to the Q&A.
Back to our picture. So yeah, open up the floor. Questions, comments, or any feedback, that'd be good. We'd love to hear what you guys think.
Thanks, Didar.
There is a question from Didar, and when she said we're going to make this public, the schema public, Dennis. Did we answer this one?
Yeah, I think we want to publish a whole bunch of this. I think now that we got some really cool schemas, I think we need to find a way, maybe for the next summit, maybe you can do a session just called schemas. I think it's good to, because again, that's even less, confidential data there. It's just basically the schema that I think Dida is asking, which I think is very useful, is the relationships between the nodes, right? So I think that is quite important. We should be sharing that.
Yeah.
There is another question from Lewis. If you go back to the Chris to the slide where we're showing the Kubernetes risk, and he was asking if it is same ticket.
This one here. Well, it's actually multiplied in multiple slides, but
yes. So no, this one is fine. On category 2, so you have Kubernetes risk, which is a so this is the engineering risks, right?
I think a better example would be, let me find it. This one here, perhaps, where we've got product 1, product 2, but we've got Kubernetes twice. And that's purely because it's affecting a different product.
Yes. So these are separate ones.
Yeah. So it's a separate risk, same name, but affecting different products.
So for every product we have, like let's say if it is using Kubernetes, let's say you're gonna have a Kubernetes risk, you can have code-induced risk, you can have people risk, you can have compliance process risk, you can have so that we kind of categorized all of this, and you can find it with different products.
So it's fair to say we can.
If I may
go on.
speak into the microphone, okay, you categorize them, and you have said it is based on a matrix, high, medium, low, whatever that means in your context, right? Now, if you get the question, so what is the risk of product 2? What is the answer? The number of tickets, how red it is, how green it is. So what is the tipping point to say a product 2 is in critical state of risk versus, I don't know, okay state of risk?
Yeah, so that's, I think at the moment, if I'll be frank, we're still using the force a little bit, right? We're still basically using common sense, right? I think we are really close to actually start to have some really good data on this. A lot of the ones we've done was, if you look at this, even this view here, the logic is that if you have tickets with reds, for example, high, then that product becomes high. So if you look at product 1 at the left, that will be a high because there is a high red there. If that goes orange, then that becomes medium.
So at the moment, it's using the inherent
Yes.
risk.
So inherent risk from below. Now, where this becomes a bit more interesting is once you go a level below, there is a certain amount of also risk acceptance, but there's also a level of normalization that we can do, where we can basically say, well, although some of this stuff is high in aggregates, that doesn't feel like a very high risk. But this is something that what we're also doing is we starting to now really engage with the stakeholders, because ultimately this definition has to be done with them. So we went to arrive at something that, yes, is very objective. At the moment is mainly driven by the kind of the risk level of the issues. But remember that every one of these risks is backed up by a whole layer of risks and vulnerabilities, which ultimately is driven to the impact of this.
Certainly,
Yeah,
but I mean, if we put products 1 through 4 in the same high category, I see product 2 as being higher risk than products 1, 3, and 4.
Yeah. So when we say we normalize it, this will be normalized across all these products, right? So yes. So in this particular case, the risk will be higher on 2, 3, and 4, right, than the others. So we when we said that we normalize the risk, it's not normalized on every column. It's normalized at this entire level here. Does that make sense? Louis, does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just having a cough fit.
Okay.
That makes sense. It's just I spent some time doing matrix-based risk analysis, and I arrived to the conclusion that it was almost impossible to aggregate it in a meaningful way, because matrices tend to oversimplify the problem. And I started looking into quantitative assessment methods, and I grant you it's more difficult to deal with them, but then you get into things like loss exceedance curves or loss acceptance curves, and these give you a nice way to aggregate things, because now in aggregate you can say, okay, the risk budget for this product is not yet depleted. The risk budget for this product has been depleted based on the risk, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to do it, right? So the way I would look at that, I would say that if you have a particular product, right, that has, let's say, that risk budget, right, or that you are within that cost acceptance, then basically that would bring the overall risk down, right? Because although technically there's a bunch of risk within that product is still within the level of acceptance of the business, which actually means on average then it's a median, right?
Yeah, but then for the business, what is the aggregate risk? So
Sure.
now it gets more interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
one is the vertical and the other one is the horizontal. So
Yeah.
for
but
you and your boss, it's more important to have the product aggregated. So what is the risk we carry as Glasswall, I will say, versus what is the what is the risk of product 1, product 2, product 3, which is more the dependency of a department, a project manager, or however you split your project, right?
Yep. Yes, and to be honest, right, the way I look at this, right, is that with this platform, we actually can make that work, right? But we're also introducing layers of this, right? So what you now for me talking about is actually probably not the next level, but the level after is where you then normalize the data based on even specific audiences. So that means that if I'm presenting the risk for each of the products, they might actually look different when you present them individually than when you present them in aggregation, right? Because when you present them individually, you want to say, well, from your point of view, this is a risk, this is what you're doing, this is where you are, right? And this is what you're contributing to the top level. And you might have a business owner say, well, I'm not happy with this, right? I want to reduce that. But it's very important that you also normalize that from a business point of view. So a very interesting question here is that which of these products is currently holding customer data, right? So you could have a product today that does not hold, or it hasn't been deployed, or has not, it's not in a very high risk situation. You can afford, for example, that product to have a higher risk than products who now are fully deployed, fully live, already containing critical data, right? You then might actually say that we have a quality gate where we don't allow products, above or below a certain element to go through. But as you go up to the business, you get to normalize it based on what the business cares. As you go down to the products or the specific in this case, you start to be very granular into what view you want to present to that product.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant what you're doing, right? It's not criticizing. On the other hand, I have the highest regard for what you have achieved and how it has matured over the years. I have been following your ideas behind it. Just this is the always unsolved question for me. So how do you aggregate risks in a meaningful way by using qualitative assessments instead of quantitative assessment?
Yeah,
And I think you have an idea on how to solve it, and I really wish you luck, right, in making that understandable for business.
Put it well, like if I'm always the first one to want to learn about how other people done it, right? But every time I spoke to individuals who've done it, they end up kind of with the same comment that you said. Yeah, it's great, but it couldn't make work. Or you have a gigantic nightmare of spreadsheets, right? Or you have an air gap between the views that you present to management that kind of make a bit of sense and actually reality, right? What I really like about what we're doing here, and you can see that there's a direct correlation between this view and the ticket 5, 6, 7 layers below, that is the one that is actually causing this.
Yeah, but I love it. I wish I could have it, to be honest. So if you ever make the schema or anything more or less public, I would love to take a look into that. That's something I'm really keen on understanding in more detail how the different layers of these graphs aggregate.
Yeah, well, let's collaborate on that one. Like, for me, the schema, it's quite interesting because, I was presenting yesterday on the Elasticsearch, right? And I found myself saying that the most important thing when you're building dashboards is not the dashboard itself, is the ability to iterate through the schema. And I would say it's the same thing here, right? Almost the most important thing on this schema is not necessarily is the ability to iterate very fast and to find the common language that makes sense to the business. Right, but absolutely, I think Petra, Chris and Abbas, I think the session that we can do next time is actually just about the schemas and to show the different schemas. And if you guys haven't seen, John Hayes, the guy that was working with me at Photobox, he did a great set of presentation where he had tons and tons of different schemas. And I think we can now, use some of that, but also show how we actually already, some of the schemas that we've created have now almost survived the test of time, right? Because they start to be quite robust on it. But just go back to your point. I completely agree that the hardest challenge here, and I think you described really well, is how to map risk in a quantitative, objective way, right? I'm not sure anybody has solved that problem, but we're making good strides on it.
I mean, the insurances have, right? That's why they ask you so many questions about when you buy an insurance for yourself, for your car, for whatever you want to buy insurance. They are doing that. They are doing quantitative risk assessment. So they ask you questions, and they know based on their experience, based on tables, based on whatever you want. Males in their early 20s, they tend to drink, they tend to drive too fast. So the price of an insurance is a lot higher than women in their 40s, right? So you pay for your insurance a lot more than if you're a male in your 20s than if you're a woman in your 40s. Plus whatever, right? And this goes down to loss acceptance curves. So the mathematical foundation behind it is very well studied. Now in cybersecurity, we took a shortcut for some reason, and we went to matrices. Now there's the other branch of it, which aggregates and uses this math, and which could allow you to have a better view, which is able to answer finally the question of the business: what is the probability of having a cybersecurity incident, and how much will it cost me? You can have an error with a certain acceptance, not what's the right term for it, with a certainty rate, right? You can say with a 90% certainty, I can tell you we will have an incident and it will cost us $100,000 this year. And that's something that the business can deal with. That's something you can buy insurance for.
I think it's all about money.
Pardon?
Yeah.
So that's what the financial people do, right?
Yeah.
And that's how they manage that. Now,
I think
we can't manage it that way, or we can, but we're just not doing it in the usual way. So I convinced myself a couple of years ago, matrices for risk management are not the way to go towards the future. We need to look into for example, the book How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity. That you get very well explained how to do this kind of analysis with a lot less data than you think you need. Because the usual comment is, oh, but we don't know this data. We cannot have this data. And it turns out you potentially need a lot less data than you think you need, but you get a more mathematically sound approach to managing risk.
Can you buy similar data?
I have no idea. I'm not in the risk management group, right? So
yeah, I know it's always like about money, right? So it's always about like how much they're gonna cost, how much they're gonna pay.
But it's mostly about your own data. So you know the cost of your data, right? So you know and if you look at FAIR, the risk management methodology, they try to quantify this. So they tell you, okay, what are the direct costs and what are the indirect costs? So how much money do you need to reset a server? How much money do you need for doing this, for incident response? Those are things for which you already know the numbers, because you know how much you pay your people for that, how many days you expect to have lost, plus whatever comes, right? So you might get a lawsuit, you might get a fine, you might get these other things. Yeah. So that's what FAIR is doing, right? So that they're trying to do that. Now, each FAIR assessment is really complex. That's the difficult part here. I don't know. I just like your approach of the graph. I'm a fan of this approach, but somehow I think in my mind I still need to marry this with a quantitative analysis to be able to aggregate and report one round number to senior management.
So you get that round number. You know, one of the things I've done before is, and because I actually had that question, so can I give a one number in progress? And you actually can, because and that's actually the simpler part, ironically. If you assign a point to each of these, high gets 5, others get 4, etc. Or even you can even make it like, exponential, whatever, like 10, whatever, 1, 3, 5, 20, whatever, right, to get more points. You actually get a global number for each of these graphs. Each of these diagrams you see here gives you one number. The key here is to make sure that the data feeds in here. And in fact, one of the things that's very interesting is that what you want to report to management after time is not just this, is the delta. How have we gone up and down? And not almost is that number, which is the aggregation from here. But the point out you made that I think is very interesting is when you said the insurance industry has done it. I agree. I think we need to learn a lot from the insurance industry because the insurance industry is very data driven. And I think cybersecurity will benefit a lot as insurance companies get better and they ask better questions, right? And that's ultimately the key.
And in these graphs, we are seeing inherent risk. That meaning, like, you know, what is the maximum risk you can have when it is red here? So this is the maximum. So we're taking the maximum here. If you have 3, I just want, you know, when we want to get to, you know, what you Dennis explained, I think we can't have inherent risk, right? You need to have the realistic risk on the lower level.
Now, Lewis, see if you can visualize this, right? The big epiphany for me occurred when I realized that, you know, when we would like to talk about the highest risks and the highest things and the things that the business should really care about and understand, what I realized was that, you know, at the high level, after a while, this doesn't become, is useful, but it's not that significant because you want to understand what you can impact. For me, the big epiphany was I realized that the highest risks and the highest vulnerabilities for the business are not the top level ones, are the levels in the middle. And they can be 3, 5, 10 times deep, 10 levels deep, but are almost like they are the risks that have the highest blast radius. So basically, which is what is the item, what is the fact, what is the vulnerability, or what's the risk that you have that when it materializes has the widest impact across the business. And that almost becomes your highest risk. And that's when you get to the world that I believe you want to, which is a world where we, you know, it's very fact driven, it's very data driven. And so we're building the foundation to live in that data driven world because everything here is hyperlinked to something that as you go further down becomes very, very tangible.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think we could easily introduce a number as well. So each of these products, for example, we could score a high risk, you know, 5 points, for example. The more they have, the bigger the number becomes, and then we can identify which product is the highest by its number.
Yeah.
How do you weigh that for the business? So, and then you can weigh this for the business because, you know, a product A can be more expensive, like more valuable to the business than product B. And
my also concern with this giving it a number is so for example something, as we said, because these dashboards are just a view on what's important to us, and as we said, something that was orange is going to become red just purely because the red one's already been sorted. So in a way, I'm just kind of concerned that giving this a number might lose the context. But when it's a dash, like when it's within a dashboard and it has the traffic light, then it kind of, in my view, might be wrong, gives it more context. But I think experimenting with this would definitely kind of give us more insight into how we could, you know, quantify.
Yeah,
because we could give it other numbers as well, like depending on the product, like Abbas said. So it's worth experimenting.
Where this becomes really interesting, right, is, you know, we even recently have this conversation about, you know, I think it was at the summit or something like that, where we were talking about the difference between when you do tactical changes, tactical fixes, and more of, you know, generic or like things that impact more products. One of the things that is very critical is that every security team member should be able to answer the question, what am I doing to reduce the risk of the business, right? So one good way to measure that is that you should be able to answer the question, you know, when you finish the project you're doing, what's the impact? And the impact ideally should be seen not just in one place, right? The impact should be seen across 2, 3, 4 areas of the business. And that's a good example of a good impact. So I actually think that giving numbers ultimately allows you for a lot of objectivity. And you have to remember that, look, the ultimate objective here is to make good decisions, right? So this is not about creating a system that exists in vacuum. It's about creating a reward system, or a system that gives visibility and allows people to make good decisions. And I think that's always been my approach, to think that this is a decision-making framework. This is actually, it's two things. It's actually technically it's three things, right? It's a decision-making framework, is a communication framework, is a data storage framework, right? So, but it's very important to always make sure that the ultimate objective here is to allow good decisions to be made.
Sure, and that's what risk management is, right? You're trying to orient decision makers into taking decisions that make sense. So allocating resources to fix things, going forward and taking the risk because the market opportunity outnumbers or outweighs the risk. That's what the C-level is being paid for, right? That's their job.
Yeah,
we just need to provide them with this information, and I think this is doing the job right.
Yeah.
This is a good solution, I think.
But I've seen lots of risk frameworks that lose the plot halfway through, and they become almost a function in itself, right? They lose because the thing about this is, when you think about, this is decision-making framework, then you always accept change, because if you can say, look, if we're not making good decisions, then it's not working, right? So that's why I think I always built on all these things a very good level of experimentation and adjustment, because it's not about a particular version of this. It's about something that works. And actually, realistically, what will work today and in 3 months or 6 months probably won't work in 12 months and a year from now, because the business has evolved.
Certainly. I mean, risk management cannot become a self-serving function.
Oh yeah. How many have you met that are that?
More than enough.
All right, I think we
then,
now know.
then everyone just ignores them, right?
Exactly, right? Cool. No, this is great threads, and great progress. So any final questions that we haven't covered?
Don't think so. But stay tuned for round 3, because we're not finished here.
Cool. Well, let's continue to collaborate on the Open Security Summit, right? I think the environment, right? I think that it seems to me that there's a theme here, which is the schema, and I think Chris, Petra, and Abbas, let's spend a bit of time on it, right? I think talking about the schema, which actually, to be honest, there's even some stuff that we published already from the photo box days and from before, right? I remember when we started, right? At Glasswall,